Join Sarah Weiss in the infinite field of energetic aliveness and heart-centered wisdom. This is the Earth, Love, Spirit podcast.
Welcome to the Earth, Love, Spirit podcast. I'm Sarah Weiss, your host, and today we're going to be spending some lovely time with Ramona Reid, who is the co-founder of the Nashville Center for Alternative Therapy. She's also an Enneagram coach, a Reiki master, and a licensed massage therapist. So before we welcome Ramona, I want to remind you to check out the offerings on the Spirit Heal Institute website. I have some exciting new programs coming up pretty quickly, and you should check them out so you can register for them. The Monday night classes called Awakening Together are very high frequency sacred circle classes. And if you need kind of a weekly dose of a deep dive into your spiritual cave and heart, this is the class for you. I also have some virtual retreats coming up at the end of January. There's a virtual retreat called In Holy Territory, Dancing with the Divine. And this is a 3-day virtual retreat where we really go deep into the silence to find the dancing spirit within our hearts. So it's virtual, you do it from home, we'll be on Zoom. And in the past year, we've done several of these and people have found them extremely transformative. And then last but not least, the Enlightened Empath program for 2021 begins in March, and it's reformatted to accommodate the beautiful energies that are coming in this year to support empaths activating their gifts and really learning to stand on their own 2 feet in their power and with grace in this world. So check those out at spirithealonline.com. The link is at the bottom of the podcast notes. Now, Ramona and I recorded a podcast about 3 months ago, and I, in my silly way, forgot to record it. So we rescheduled, and this is our rescheduled podcast. So we were so excited to speak with each other. We jumped into the podcast without a formal opening because the first one didn't work. So help me welcome Ramona Reid. So my question is, how are you different now than you were 2 months ago that we're doing the interview now?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. So much has happened. I think this year has been like that, right? Like every month there's some sort of new shift and challenge and opportunity to grow and grieve. And I feel like, since even just looking at the events of yesterday and, here in Nashville, what we've gone through this year has just been, man, it's been brutal and also beautiful, so there's been a lot since we've talked. We had a bombing on Christmas morning. We've had, this attempted coup yesterday in the Capitol building, and what I do for a living, working with people and dealing with stress and healing. In times like this, there's always more opportunity to hold space for people and to help them, as well as navigate it for myself. So yeah, I couldn't even really list all of the different things that have happened in the past 2 months since we've talked, but in general, when people are like, "How you doing?" My answer is always, "I'm pretty good. How are you?" And that's the truth. I'm not just bypassing. It's doing pretty good. I think I'm really grateful for a platform, for an opportunity to still be alive, to still be able to grow and learn, and for my privileges that have been unconsciously received throughout my life that are now more consciously experienced. So I'm doing very well. How have you been?
I've been well. It's really interesting because I can get over involved with a lot of my clients and friends and the things they're going through. But when I sit back and think about it, we're good. I'm good and grateful, like you said, and just would love to see people learn to resource, themselves inside so that they can feel better about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so it's,
Yeah, I love that. I'm gonna write that down. To resource themselves inside. I mean, that's so important, right? It's like we're looking outside of ourselves, and that's what's creating a lot of the problems.
it really is.
Yeah.
And they both exist, and we tend to forget that those inner resources exist when we get over involved with everything that's outside of us.
Right.
And we need both. And that's what you're going to help us talk about today, too.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
so, have you, has your work with the Enneagram been growing and growing? Is that taking up more space in your work now?
Yeah, I'd say it is. One thing the pandemic has afforded is an opportunity to actually reach more people virtually. Um, so whereas my bodywork practice, massage and Reiki practice has fluctuated necessarily with, just trying to be safe and keep everyone safe and taken care of. That practice or that part of my profession has increased, I would say. Um, People looking for opportunities to, like you just said, resource themselves inside. The Enneagram is a really great tool for that. One of the best, in my opinion. And the one that I think I've most heavily sourced for my own growth and evolution, continual evolution. So, yeah, I see people all over the world via Zoom and have been able to um, access, I think, other people that maybe not so willing to go out, and which understandably it's a pandemic, and have been more wanting to still learn and connect. And so I do these, weekly or now gone to monthly Reiki healing sessions and meditations that I offer for free. So there's been a lot of different really cool pivots that I've been involved in the past year with my career. But the Enneagram being, it's really grown. And in our culture, it's really kind of expanded. People want to know what this is. It's sort of the new pop culture thing, which is a blessing and a curse, you know?
Yes, actually, that would be something I'd love to speak about because let's talk about the blessing and the curse part of it.
Mm-hmm.
What are you perceiving as the curse part?
Well, like anything that becomes popular, that
Hmm.
implies that it can fall out of being popular. And
We just had a good example of that yesterday. Okay.
right,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I think that when anything is highlighted in that way as like a trend,
Hmm.
we tend to just sort of skim the surface of it. And from my perspective and from what I've seen its value being, the Enneagram is not something to skim the surface of. Um, it's sort of like the guitar in that if you can play the guitar a little bit, you can kind of delve in as much as you want to. It's both one of the easiest instruments to learn as a beginner and the hardest to master. And I see that with the Enneagram. It's like you can kind of delve in a little bit and say, oh, I think I'm a type 7, or I think my mom's a 6. And and then it can become a little bit reductive, and we start to just label things and people and ourselves, um, and sometimes tend to stop there unless we have a really great community or support system or coach or therapist that's working with us in understanding what these things mean and what these labels, that I don't even think should be used as labels, but what these mean and what it means about ourselves. And I think you can see it online in the funny, humorous little memes that are out there about Enneagram stuff, which some of them are really accurate. And then some of them are accurate about one aspect of our personality. And then we don't stop to look at maybe why people are behaving like that. Like it might be funny to kind of look at somebody's ego structure, shadow side, kind of exemplified out there. It might be a little bit humorous to be able to like understand someone's way of being. But if we're not getting that it's coming from a deep fear or a wound, then I think we're missing the point of connection and understanding. Um, yeah, so that's what I mean, I guess, by blessing and a curse. It's like the blessing is it's brought more people to the table, The curse being maybe that the table's not set as well sometimes as maybe I would like, but I'm saying that from the perspective of Enneagram type 1, who often has a tendency to perfectionism. So even that I've seen as that, you know, this whole evolution has been perfect, and it is bringing more people to the table. And I think that the responsibility then is the people that have a reverence for this method and this modality and this practice, to set the table really well, and to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and doing our own practices, not bypassing our own understanding of ourselves and our own healing in order to just, you know, kind of regurgitate information about the Enneagram. I think it needs to land in the teachers, and we need to be students always.
I think that's beautifully spoken because, you know, before we know it, instead of asking what your sign is for a pickup line, maybe they'll be saying, "What's your Enneagram number?" I'm a
Right.
6, right?
Right. Well, that
So,
happens. I mean, it happens in jobs too, where I've heard this, where people are being asked in their interviews, like what dominant Enneagram type they are.
really?
And I'm just
Oh,
interested in like what information are these interviewers gleaning from this? Like because in other words, if there's an ideal type, then we're not getting the point. Now there might be some situations that some types might be able to navigate better in, but I think we all have all the types in us, and we have the capacity to access all of these different energies and all these different gifts. And so if we're either letting people in or not letting people in based on an arbitrary number, or our preferred or acquired coping mechanisms, you know, however you choose to look at it, I think we're limited in that way, and we're not really seeing the person's true potential, and the possibilities that these relationships might bring. It's just like you said with signs. It's like, oh, I'm not going to date a Leo, or I don't want to ever, you know, get involved in business with a whatever. I don't even know what they are, so I can't even speak to that. But it's like that, you know. It creates more division in that way. If you've had a history of dating someone who's a type 8 and saying, well, I'm never going to do that again. You don't know. Maybe it wasn't a healthy type 8 that you were dating before, you know, because healthy 8s are wonderful, powerful, beautiful, heart-led leaders that are, you know, very compassionate and strong. So, you know, that's what I guess I mean by blessing, is let's learn all of it before we start to kind of weaponize it against each other.
so what I really hear you saying is you love the depth and the sacred aspects of the Enneagram and would love to have that valued in our culture.
Yeah. And that word that you use, sacred, that's interesting because that's how I feel. Well, as the reformer, the type 1 dominant in that's one of the sort of essential qualities of the type, is a sense of sacredness and maybe goodness. And I do think that there's lots of areas in my life and in the world where the Enneagram is seen with that kind of more sacredness, or something to be studied, not something to be kind of like used as a party game. Yeah, there's especially the narrative tradition, the teaching that I've been learning for the past year and a half. There's a reverence there for that sacredness, and for seeing everyone's true selves and their core wounds and their gifts and all of that through them talking about their own process. So it's less about like, let me tell you about the Enneagram. It's more like, why don't you tell me about you? You know, it's definitely a connecting tradition of teaching.
Beautiful. Let's back up a little bit for the listeners and give them an overview of like what the Enneagram is and where it came from, what tradition it's based in.
Yeah. I'm not as well versed in the traditional like kind of lineage of the Enneagram. I think that there's a lot of different schools of thought of that. I will say that it has its roots in antiquity. And by roots, I don't mean what it is today, right? I mean, it's the ideas of passion and virtue, and the idea of kind of sacred qualities and how we show up. That, and then also the symbolism, the symbol itself, and the idea of like the law of one, the law of three, all of that. And it's nothing that I'm educated enough to really get in deep conversation about. But what I will say is that more recently, in the past several decades, it's sort of been turned into or created into being a more of a study of personality. And it's sort of an amalgam of psychology, spirituality, and philosophy. And so if you look at the roots and even like looking at each type's passion, if you look at the 7 deadly sins, there's some talk that's where that came from. This idea of where we go in shadow. But the Enneagram itself now, at least the Enneagram of personality, which is just one of the Enneagons that we've learned about, is that we are dominant in one of these 9 different types. And the way that we kind of can group those is different. There's lots of different triads. There's the different centers of intelligence, that there's 3 of these types in each of the centers of intelligence. There's the harmony triads. There's the social styles. There's so many ways. Like I've said, I maybe know 1% of what there is to know, and people consider me to be some sort of an expert, and I think that's funny. But I think I'm an expert in how I've used it for myself, and in learning about people in my life. So basically, if you see it as, the idea is, and I believe this to be true, that we're born a type, and then our environment then influences, I should say we're born dominant in one of the types, and our environment then influences our level of health inside that type. So the 8s, 9s, and 1s are part of the body center, and they experience autonomy and an embodied sense of intuition, and also anger in 3 different totally separate ways. But that's one way we can kind of separate the types, is this kind of body instinctual center of the 8s, 9s, and 1s. And then there's the heart types, 2s, 3s, and 4s, that are interested more in attention and feelings and being seen, and have an emotion around shame often that will show up. And then there's the 5s, 6s, and 7s, part of more of the mind types, the thinking center, and they have an interest in security and safety and can experience fear very viscerally. And so this is sort of like how the different types broken up perceive the world, is through these 9 different lenses based on what's important to them, based on what center they value, whether it's their body or gut center of knowing, whether it's their heart intelligence or whether it's their mind intelligence. That's one basic way of kind of separating the types, as well as understanding, what the prime motivation is. Like for the 2s, it's feeling love. And for the 8s, it's feeling powerful. And for the 6s, it's a sense of safety and knowing and security. So we all have, again, all of these types in us. We all have these energies of these types in us. We're not just like in one little box forever. For me, dominant in type 1, I have a lot of 2 energy, the giver, the helper. And so I have a lot of access to that heart center. And then I also have a very easy access to type 7, because that's kind of, one of the places I navigate to when I'm feeling healthy and present, is this sense of like joyful presence and abundance and freedom. And then I have a connection to 9 too, because that's one of my wings. So we all experience all of the types, but there's one that's kind of our home base, that I learned it as, and I believe it to be true, that when we're not present, it's what shows up. It's like it's what shows up when we're not here,
when we're not trying to control things and put a face on the world. Yeah.
Right. It also shows up when we are present. Like for me, when I am present, when I'm doing a daily meditation and I'm valuing kind of my feelings and feeling them and taking good care.
Pause for a moment there.
Yeah.
That sounded like a beautiful practice.
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah, you assume that people do that, but you just said you have a practice of valuing your feelings. How many people actually stop to do that? I love that.
Yeah, too few. I think we're not taught that.
Mm-hmm.
We're taught to do something with our feelings. We're not taught to actually just be the feeling,
Yes.
But it's taken, I'm 46, and it took me a long time to learn how to be sad and learn how to be scared, and to learn how to look for that feeling underneath a way of being. In other words, one of the things that directs me towards my organic feelings now is a symptom. And that symptom might be anxiety, or it might be overworking, or it might be maybe shortness of breath. I might be unconsciously holding my breath. And I've just taught myself through adult chair inner child coaching work, basically, to stop and say, what is going on here? Because it's not just the symptom. It's not just my shoulders hurt or I'm anxious. There's something I'm leaving or avoiding in order to do a feeling, because that's what we're taught. We're not taught how to be the feeling. We're taught to do the feeling. And then allowing that feeling to live in me and kind of metabolize and have its way with me for a little bit, while recognizing that it's safe. So both of those things have to happen, right? Like I'm scared and I'm safe at the same time. That kind of shut down the amygdala, the nervous system response that turns on that stress response. And I just cry sometimes like a little kid, and then it goes away and I don't die, and then I move on. And I think that's, one of the biggest things I've learned from the Enneagram is to notice the symptoms. Like the one shows up like this in stress.
This to me is a beautiful teaching and something people really need to hear right now, because this is an example of you accessing your inner resources. It's also an example of a healthy adult. I love that.
I try.
And so, so can you connect how the Enneagram has contributed? I'm not saying it might be it's not the sole source, but how that has contributed to you being able to be in this adult space of valuing and being your feelings and learning to accept and love yourself?
Yeah. Well, at first, it was kind of mind-blowing. I got to know myself through the lens of believing I was a type 2, that I was dominant in 2.
And what's a type 2?
Type 2 is the helper. It's in the heart center. We have these essential qualities of like sweetness and attunement to other people's needs, and we're the source of this unconditional love for ourselves and others. It shows up out of presence as a sense of pridefulness and flattery, giving to get. Here, I don't need this, you do, but really it's all about me and what I can get out of the giving, which is, oftentimes, unfortunately, conditional, to kind of stoke those feelings of me being the center and the pride. So it shows up as someone who's very giving and loving with an agenda. And so I learned a lot about my own wounding, like childhood wounding, through the lens of thinking that was my dominant type. And I still believe that, I'm pretty even 1 and 2. But what it did, learning about the Enneagram, what it did was it provided at first language for what I was feeling that was astounding to me, because I didn't understand how something so personal and profound for me, that felt very almost hidden and very unique to me, was in a book, many books. And I could read about it and be like, oh my God, like that, I feel so exposed and so seen. Like, how is that possible that this could be written about me, and then there's 9 types. So that means maybe possibly is one of every 9 people in the world seeing things the way I saw it. And then it was, wait a minute, that means there's 8 other ways that people see things, because I also thought in some way that everybody also saw things the way I did. And so maybe that's the pride that was coming out there. So it first gave the language, and then it grew compassion, because if that's out there and I can understand why that 2-ness was coming out, why that need to be valued as needed and lovable and helpful, that was like my currency. That's what I was using at the time to feel safe. And I would learn to develop a lot of compassion for myself through that, because I got what I wasn't getting when I was little, and how I've, kind of created this way of being to get my needs met at a very early age. Again, to do fear. I learned how to do sadness and do fear through the lens of this, a lot of the lens of this too. After years of thinking that, maybe 6 years of thinking that, and I really kind of worked through and healed a lot of those wounds of that little latchkey kid that just wanted to be paid attention to. And then I noticed that my motivations underneath some of that behavior were less 2 and more 1, which is a sense of wanting to be good and wanting to be seen as ethical and right and moral, and having this sense of like self-reform and perfectionism that was very directed internally. That was like another evolution of awareness. And so it's been the most valuable thing that I've studied as it pertains to my own growth and my parenting. Oh my gosh, I don't even know what kind of parent I would be without this awareness. And then as a partner and as a business owner, as a member of my community, just being able to be more awake to what's fueling some of my behavior and how to pause and feel the feeling underneath it before I just, go out and react in the world. It's more of a quite literally responsibility. So an ability to respond instead of react, because of my studies in this and my studies of myself, I guess, and of this system. And then the next step being, wow, I got to see everyone else's wounded child, because I could see how the 4 and the 5 and the 6 and all of these different types are going to show up and project their pain out there. And then coaching just kind of happened because I just wanted to talk with people, and people wanted to talk with me, and they wanted to, I guess, see how I'd use the Enneagram to heal parts of me. And that's how it started. And then now it's just, it's my passion. It's what I want to do forever. It's Enneagram work, learning, coaching, talking, feeling with people, and then working through inner child wounding through the adult chair. Both of those things, I think, combined with energy work as well, because you can do that virtually for sure. Those 3 things, I think, are this beautiful sort of dance of healing.
When you reference the adult chair, are you referencing Michelle Chalfant's program?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, she's a good friend, and is finally, after many years of us, I think, poking and prodding her to have a certification program, it just came out this year. And so I'm going through that to make it official. I've been a Enneagram coach for about 4 years and have incorporated adult chair work into that. But now there's a program and I'll have a little piece of paper, and I'll have a lot more information and tools. And I've been on our podcast several times talking about the Enneagram and how we can incorporate the Enneagram into inner child work, because we can understand the unique flavor of our inner child based on what our Enneagram type is. We can understand the unique flavor of our adolescent kind of coping mechanisms, and we can understand what's there for us, what's available in our healthy adult chair when we're able to learn how to be present with the uncomfortable feelings and with whatever is so right in front of us. And so we both, Michelle and I both, see the value of these different methods, kind of how they work together really beautifully and enhance each other. Because with the Enneagram work, it's like, well, now what? That's great, but what do I do next? And so that's where the adult chair work, the inner child work, can come in and kind of give us a place to go with it, a next step. And then I just think it's a beautiful collaboration.
Michelle and I have interviewed each other as well on each other's podcasts, and I really respect her work. So let me ask you this. Do you have a degree in some kind of counseling or therapy?
Nope.
Okay. So this is a question that a lot of people who are going into coaching and who work with people in an in-depth way are trying to navigate. And so where does the coaching and the therapy begin, and how do you navigate that when you're working so deeply with people?
Right. So I have a personal practice of therapy. I go to a therapist. I also have a coach, an energy worker. Like, I have a team there. And when I opened up the holistic health center that I have here in Nashville, I wanted to make sure that there were professionals on board that were a lot smarter than me, that we could reference and we could refer to for really big stuff that came up that people really needed to go into the past and work through, because I see the value of that. It's worked for me. I wanted people that knew more than I did about psychology and could help me navigate some of those places in my life. And so I had, with the center, LCSWs, licensed professional counselors, that on hand to work with. It wasn't just Enneagram coaching. It was, we have an acupuncturist, Chinese herbalist, we have body workers, massage, we have someone who does EFT tapping, and I have a whole team of an integrative MD that's been doing that almost 40 years. When it's a more like physical symptom situation. So we've got, we work with people basically through symptom. People come into the health center because something's not working. At least they're perceiving that something's not working. I actually assert that their body's working perfectly to show them something, but they'll come in that way. And so whether it's trauma, anxiety, depression, cancer, an autoimmune condition, pain, something like that, or just, having having a deep wounding around relational issues, sexual trauma, all of that, there's an opportunity to not just say, okay, well, you need to go talk to a therapist, or you need to talk to this doctor about meds. It's like there's an opportunity to look at the entire person and see what's necessary. For me, the Enneagram is a tool inside a toolbox that I'm not the only holder of. I think there's lots of different people that we can work with one client. And so when you think of therapy and coaching, the difference for me, and this isn't a question you asked, but it's a question I've really wanted to kind of answer, is that therapists are really well-trained usually and well-versed in looking into the past and figuring out ways to heal through kind of reframing or studying or healing things that have happened in the past, whereas coaching really looks forward with what's so right now. Like, how can we move forward? So in coaching, there's been a bit of, I was hesitant to even call myself a coach. And as a matter of fact, it was Michelle who first said, you need to do this. I was really hesitant. I went on her podcast 4 years ago, I think, and said, I'm really fascinated about the Enneagram. And she's like, well, you know a lot more about it than I did. And I've done all the trainings, And she's like, so you're an Enneagram coach? And I was like, no. I talk with people about it and kind of share what I know. And she's like, yeah, you're an Enneagram coach? And I was like, well, no, she's like, so do you work with people? And I'm like, well, I've got somebody at the center that does that, because I had a therapist that was doing that. And she's like, your whole body lights up when you talk about it. And I was like, yeah, it's my thing, And she's like, okay, so, and then she went right into the intro and she's like, Ramona Reid, Enneagram coach. She sees people all over the world. I was just like, whoa. And she's been, I think, one of my top 3 biggest supports this past 4 years of that, saying, this is what you do. How do you make it so that you can do it with integrity and with skill? And so I've worked with people to try to build those skills. I go through lots of training programs, online, in-person intensives. Right now I'm in the middle of a probably 1.5 year certification, again, through the narrative, I think I told you about. And I sit on panels, I listen to panels. So I've done a lot of work with it. I think the most important work, though, has been very personal. And I think that's an important component for a therapist or a coach, is that we don't bypass our own process in order to just kind of speak about something or try to help somebody else. I think that clients can really see and feel through that process. I've experienced that myself.
Well, that really speaks to your authenticity and integrity, and that conveys non-verbally to anyone that you speak with. It just, vibrates through the airwaves and helps them have a reference within themselves for what that measure of truth is inside.
Mm.
So were you referencing a program called the Narrative? Is that
right? The narrative tradition through Enneagram Worldwide, I believe it is, has a training program. There's lots of training programs now. When I first was interested in the Enneagram, there wasn't really a coaching certification like the nationwide board of that. It's been something that's kind of caught up with the profession as coaching has become more popular. But I was kind of waiting to find one, because I always knew I wanted to do one. I was waiting to find a coaching certification that really spoke to the way I wanted to teach it and the way I wanted to learn it and the way I experienced it. And so the narrative tradition is just the way of teaching where we sit as panel members of a type and explain our perspective of our type. So instead of, like I said, the top-down teaching of here's how a 9 is, taught by a 3 maybe, or even taught by a 9, that's still one perspective, right? Whereas we get to look at the broad range of all the different ways that people dominant in type 9 can show up. And there's so many different ways, but there's so many beautiful commonalities, and you can really see that visually and feel it energetically when you go to an in-person training where you can watch a panel of people that are all dominant in this one type explain their way of dealing with stress, or how they cope with conflict, or what their fears are and how they navigate that. Like that, there's just something really beautiful about that I really like. And so I've gone through, the first several trainings were in person, but my last in-person training was right after the tornado here in Nashville, March 3rd, and right before lockdown. We had a weekend intensive, and everything else since then has been online, but it conveys for sure the trainings that I've done, and I will continue to do them until I'm certified with that. But I've gone through, like I said, a lot of different things online, and we'll always keep doing that, sort of a continuing education for myself.
That sounds like a wonderful opportunity. So if someone calls you up and wants to start working with you with the Enneagram, how does that process work? How do they enter into a working relationship with you?
Yeah, I think there's as many answers to that as there are people, but I would say that a lot of times these days, people already have some sort of understanding of their dominant type. Back when I first started doing this, they didn't even know what the word was or what we were talking about, but they were just curious because a friend said, you should go talk to her, or you should learn about this. So now more people show up kind of with an idea, but if they don't have an idea, there's tests available, some better than others. There's a $12 test through Enneagram Institute called the Reid, RHETI, that I like, that I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but I just like to look at that test result because it shows all of the different percentages of the different types. So in other words, like you might score 28 in a type 2 and 21 in a type 1 and 19 in a type 3, and so it's not just telling you what your dominant type is, it's showing you the kind of range of efficiencies you have of each type. And I'm using that word intentionally because I learned it from Dr. Jerome Libba, who's become a bit of a friend. He's an Enneagram teacher and peer, I think functional neurologist in Atlanta, Georgia. And he wrote a book called The Brain-Based Enneagram. And he discusses how the brain and the Enneagram actually correlate. It's fascinating. If you haven't read that book, I'd recommend it. But he talks about the efficiencies we have in different types. For instance, there's maybe our top 3. We're going to be very efficient in the energies of those types. And then maybe the bottom 3, we're not going to have developed an efficiency. My bottom 3 are all the mind center, 5, 6s, and 7s. This doesn't mean I'm not smart. I think what it means is that I didn't see when I was younger, and Dr. Libba gets into this in his book, I didn't really see any modeling of that when I was younger, of anyone dominant in those types, or as those energies of 5, 6s, and 7 being a valid or effective way to stay safe. So I didn't see that, or I saw it modeled ineffectively. And so what I learned is to kind of exemplify or enhance my efficiencies of type 2, 1, 4, 7, 8, like those ones. And so I like starting a conversation with that test because it'll show the entire broad range of our percentages of efficiency. However, oftentimes I'll start a conversation with people that don't feel like taking a test, and they just want to talk about the fact that they're deeply hurt over something that happened and they want to know how to move on. And you can really work with the Enneagram without necessarily working with the word Enneagram. I had a coaching client who for 2 years did not want to even take the test because he was very anti the idea of being in a box of personality. Was really it was a struggle for him because that's what he had, that the Enneagram was. And so we didn't even talk about it. But he kept coming back. And I think it was because I understood, as I got to know him through the years, I understood what some of his core fears and gifts and strengths were, and could speak to that. And and then, eventually took the test and actually ended up being dominant in one of the types that really doesn't like being typed. So it made a lot of sense, Yeah, there's lots of different ways to start. A lot of times, like I said, I start with physical symptom, because that's just what I do as a holistic health center owner. So people come in really sick, and while we'll look at the symptoms and I'll kind of refer them out to people who have a lot more information than I do about that, we'll also look at the emotional component, the source of some of these illnesses, which I believe a high percentage of the time emanate from emotional wounds, emotional trauma. And I think that's a great place to look at if you've got a physical disease or symptom, is why did this occur? Instead of just like dealing with a symptom, it's looking into how it became a part of your physical embodied experience. Because symptom, the etymology of the word symptom even means to fall together, to come together. And that's how we used to do healthcare before we got so damned efficient at fixing broken bones and, pharmaceuticals. We really used to look at, back in like the 1700s, like, why is this happening? What's going on? And I love that we're kind of getting back to that now.
I love how you're referencing this aspect of healing emotionally, and then when we can heal more, we find out that we have just a whole range of capacities that we haven't been able to develop yet, because those emotional wounds were preventing us from seeing those capabilities and capacities.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it's a very compassionate approach to helping someone develop.
Right.
It's so interesting just how much wounding is in our culture, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think it's, we don't like to really talk about it. We like to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
We like to throw a pill at it or get it to just kind of go away, because it's not comfortable. And we also deem it as that there's something wrong or we're broken. So who wants to talk about that? And it's like we keep coming up with more ways to anesthetize and avoid. You look at the commercials, like, are you feeling this? Are you feeling this? Let's get rid of it. And, what I would love to see is a commercial that's like, are you anxious? Are you in pain? Let's feel that, like, deeply for a little bit. Just like a commercial.
Yeah, let's just take a commercial break to feel.
Yeah. I mean, really, let's stop for a second and not make you wrong for this symptom. And let's just really let it be there a minute and ask it what it has to tell you. And have gratitude for this symptom that's working. It's your body working perfectly to tell you that something needs attention. And let's not be so quick to get rid of it, as well as, let's not be so quick to get rid of our fear that we forget to feel it, just because we weren't ever taught how. Let's actually be scared and let that be okay, and teach our kids that that's okay, so we don't perpetuate this kind of cultural doing of our emotions. And I think it's such a simple concept and yet so difficult, because we've become ingrained and hardwired to do it this way. It's sort of culturally encouraged that we avoid, and that we do something with our symptoms, with our feelings. And I see symptom now as, man, it's our body working perfectly. So if you can feel gratitude for yourself instead of some sort of rejection of yourself or fear, like that something's wrong, it's like, that's a good first foundational step to healing. I think, if you're trying to heal through trying to fix something that's perceived as being broken, you're not going to really be able to heal, I think, because you're starting off with a judgment. And saying that, coming from someone dominant in type 1, who has a lot of inner criticism and self, I've called it my self-improvement project that I was on for decades. I'm not doing that anymore. That's been my own evolution, is how to really see the alignment in what is happening outside of myself. And I don't have to fix everything. I don't have to fix me. I don't have to fix you. I don't have to fix the world. There's so many opportunities, to see things as wrong right now externally. as well as internally. And I think it's really cool that I live in a lot of gray now. I don't have to see everything as wrong, right, black and white. That's really the lower level energies of the type 1.
Well, it's the polarized energies that make us pick black and white answers to everything,
Yeah.
that hem us in that way. So let
Yeah.
me ask you this. So as you're describing some of the personality types, how does the Enneagram interface with the archetypal energies and the archetypal personalities?
I don't really know. I think you would probably be able to speak to that better. I will say that there is sort of a caricature that we could project of each type and look at it as a whole. I will say, I can go through and kind of run through, and maybe you could align those with the archetypal energies. But the 8 being the challenger, they have this sense of kind of force and vitality, and they're very protective and can be very forceful. And then there's the peacekeeper, that it has this sense of groundedness and peace, and it's kind of slow moving. I think of it as like syrup, this beautiful sense of groundedness. And then the reformer, the ones that write the petitions, the type 1s, the ones that want to fix everything. And there's a very staunch sense of like physicality of those 3 types. So I don't know if even just looking in that center, there might be an archetype we could just, assign to that. But I have to say that, some of the language with my peers, and I'm not as familiar with when it comes to goddesses or spiritual terms or things like that, or archetypes. I'm not as familiar.
Okay, so I have one last question that is of real interest to me. Since I work a lot with empaths, and I'm wondering if empaths fall into a particular type, or if you see empaths individually spanning the different Enneagram personalities.
Yeah. So if you're speaking of empaths as being people that are really easily able to access the emotions, the feelings, the experiences of others, and attunement to, there's definitely certain types that have more of a propensity toward that. So there's what's called the social styles of the types, whether that be assertive, withdrawn, or compliant. And what I've noticed in the withdrawn stances, so that would be the 4s, 5s, and 9s, they tend to kind of step back from the energy of others, while at the same time, the reason being is because they have such a natural attunement to the energy of others that they need to sort of withdraw sometimes into their own experience to get some footing. So the 4s, 5s, and 9s, each of different center. The 4s in the heart center feel things very deeply, both their own feelings and their own experiences, as well as the experiences of others. And I mean to such an extent that they can become very attached or kind of enmeshed with the experiences of others, and in a way exhausted by the emotional energy, either their own or other people's. The 5s do that in a more mental center way. So there's like a knowing or maybe cognition, possibly psychic abilities that the 5s have. So it's an empathic sense of the mental center, a knowing. So the 4s, it's more of the heart knowing and the empathy, that they're able to feel what other people feel and hold space for. The 5s, it's more of a knowing from that kind of mind center. And what can be overwhelmed by that in a group of people. The 9s do that bodily, right in the middle of that body center. They do that in their whole being. So the 9s can actually sort of merge into the experience of the other in a way that's self-avoidant, or not even avoidant. It's sort of self-amnesiac, right? So it's like, I know exactly what you're feeling because I can feel it in my cells. And so I've sensed that when I talk with people that are 4s, 5s, and 9s, there's this sort of inherent empathic ability that they have that may be more just organic. The 2s also, type 2 in the heart center, that the helper, they have an attunement that's also really, I've heard described as empathic, and it's very developed in that they'll walk into a room and know the energy of the room and who might need them and why and how. And I've heard it described, I do a radio show, and I've done panel shows with all the different types. And there was the show I did with the type 2 a couple years ago. She said, I can walk into a room and I can be having dinner in a room, and I'll be wanting to be with the person I'm with, but I'm so attuned to the table next to me, or even across the room, I know that they're having a fight. And it's like I can feel it, and I want to give and provide something in that space. And I would say, you know, I think every type has the ability to experience empathy and the ability to be empathic. But those 4 types, I would imagine, would be the most likely. 3s, 7s, and 8s have the more assertive stance, more closed boundary types, where actually their heart center will drop off and they'll not be as able to access it. So I think that that those types would be maybe the least likely to be empaths as a skill, maybe, you know, because we don't all need to be empaths. Maybe they're able to stand more in their own centers. But yeah, that would be my answer. You know, I feel like we all have that as a gift that we can cultivate, but there are some people that are just sort of naturally inclined.
That's fascinating. That is absolutely fascinating. So Ramona, why don't you tell us about your center, your radio program, and how people can access you. And I will have this information in the show notes as well.
Sure. I will say that, you know, the center, which is Nashville Center for Alternative Therapy, has really evolved through the pandemic. It's evolved through a lot of things. We had this, you know, really devastating tornado that hit, and then we've had the pandemic, and then we had this Nashville experienced a bomb on Christmas morning. Like, we've as a community been really I think extra blessed with opportunities to heal and grow this year amidst, you know, everybody's ample opportunities. And because
That's an understatement. Yeah.
the silver lining part of me. But I have taken that opportunity of having to close down for a couple months to really look in and sort of be thoughtful about what I wanted to do going forward. And I always knew that I wouldn't sign another 3-year lease at my location, that the practice that I had involved a lot of different people. And at this point, people aren't going to see therapists face to face. And so we're not providing that as a service anymore. And it really gave me an opportunity to rethink what I wanted to do. It's sort of that 80-20 rule. Like, you know, you want to put, we end up putting like 20% of our energy on the things that we really most want. And so I wanted to shift that and put 80% of my energy on what I most wanted to do. And that would be Reiki, Enneagram, inner child work. So we closed the center location that we were at 2 months ago and moved into a smaller private studio. We're still seeing people very safely. We have, you know, filtration and all of that. We're still seeing people safely that need us. And I've also kind of evolved out of the in-person being the most use of my time. So we've really pared back. It's the acupuncturist, my partner Yvonne, and I, one massage therapist, once we're able to do that safely again, and myself. And then Kim, who's doing EFT, and that's all virtual except for the in-person body work. So that's the center now, not what it was a year ago, and that's beautiful and perfect, because what we're doing now is creating a nonprofit. It's going to be a spiritual center, meditation center, where we're going to be able to provide opportunities for intentional healing meditations, such as Dr. Joe Dispenza does, you know, a lot of these intentional healing sorts of meditations and mindfulness. We're going to be doing that and helping people kind of wake up in a different way. We bought some land in northern New Mexico, and we're going to be living in both places and creating this new center. And it's going to be focused on healing our wounds and being present in our lives, and spirituality and vibrational therapy and frequency and sound healing and all of those things. Which is, you know, it will come when it will come. I have my NashvilleCenter.com is my website, and we're going to be talking about all that. And the radio show I've been doing for about 4.5 years. It's called Holistic Revolution. It's on WXNA in Nashville. And it's a holistic health radio interview show. So I talk about everything. I interview musicians, healthcare practitioners, regular people trying to work through their stuff with their health journeys, as well as, you know, practitioners to talk about all these different alternative therapies we might not know a lot about. I'm also starting a podcast very soon that's going to be really focusing on Enneagram, adult chair work, and energy work. And all that'll be up on our socials. It's at Nashville Center on Instagram and Nashville Center for Alternative Therapy on Facebook. And so that's kind of what I'm going toward. I'm slowing down and reprioritizing family and time off and breath work and movement and being in the next right place. Yeah.
Well, that doesn't sound like slowing down to me, but it sounds very rich.
I guess it's paring down. It's sort of like pruning, like weeding your
Right.
garden. Like you're still gardening, but you're really focusing on what brings you pleasure and what provides a bounty. So yeah, that's what it is.
That's beautiful. That seems to be a theme for a lot of people this year,
For sure.
that we really focus on who we are, what would bring us ease, joy, and spiritual fulfillment, and then to become a person who impacts the world in a positive way. So thank you so much, Ramona, for taking the time to share your wisdom with us today. And blessings on everything that you're doing. Just sounds wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Blessings to everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Earth, Love, Spirit podcast. If you like what you heard, the best compliment you can give us is to share this podcast with a friend. And be sure to give us some stars and a favorable review at Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen in.